research. And so right away, what that means is we can only apply this method to majestic documents that actually have an authorship claim. In other words, here's this document, I'm reading it, there's lots of stuff about aliens in it, and then it's signed by a particular person. Okay, so there's no evidence that this was fabricated in the sense that somebody else wrote this memo for FDR or something like that. Even if it was dictated, like to a secretary, it's still good because the secretary is going to type out what the person says. So we had a little bit of leeway there, but if it has a certain authorship attribution, that was good. Another criterion that Carol mentioned was it had to have a decent amount of length. You couldn't just have a memo of one line. It needed to be at least a paragraph, something like that. She also, we both of us really wanted to zero in on documents that had an author, were long enough, and that also kind of focused on extraterrestrial content, extraterrestrial claims. It also had to be prose sentences, like it couldn't be a list, like a register of things in a box or something like that. It had to be prose text. There were certain hoops we had to jump through. And so we did that, and what my job was, I had, somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 or 10 documents that had a name. So I had sort of 9 or 10 categories now, 9 or 10 people. And there were FDR, people like Truman, Eisenhower, Nathan Twining, Alan Dulles, things like this. So my job, my part of this, was to go out and find documents that no one would dispute were written by that person. And then I had to have them typed out, if they weren't already, exactly, even with errors, even with punctuation, because in what Carol does is her method doesn't look for vocabulary that you would expect for the period or for the subject matter. It's not that. What she's looking for are really the small words, function words, things like conjunctions, things like interjections, punctuation, the way a person punctuates habitually, the way they use semicolons versus commas or periods, things like that, things that just unconsciously you don't even think about. They're ingrained in the way you write. Different phrases, sort of, colloquialisms that are germane to the individual. That's what her method targets. Things that you can't consciously fake if you were a faker. All right, because you'd have to be living inside the person's head, and even shut your brain off, because these are subconscious traits. They just work themselves out by habit in what you write. So I had to find documents nobody would dispute, preserve everything down to the jot and tittle, the punctuation, have those typed out, submit that to her, and then she would do the rest. And so that's what I did. And we had batches of those that she applied in her method to. We can describe the method if you like. I don't know how deeply you want to get into this, but that's what she does. She wanted to get a profile of the knowns, the ones that were undisputed, and then we would do the same to the unknowns, the questionable ones, the majestic ones, and then the process would at some point compare the profiles of the known FDR documents to the speculated FDR documents. And not only that, but she would compare the speculated documents to all the other profiles too. And each one would get compared to all the other profiles as well, because what her process does, again, is it tests for likelihoods. If this document, the unknown, was written by the one over here in the known, there should be a very close pattern that emerges. If the pattern, though, that emerges in the speculated pile is actually very closely aligned to 3 or 4 other profiles that it shouldn't be close to, that's really suspicious.
Yeah.
That would look like maybe there was a common hand in those 3 or 4 piles, that sort of thing. That's what she looks for.
Yeah, so with that description, I don't think we need to get into more specifics. What did she conclude from this analysis?
Well, basically there was only one document in the whole bunch, in all of the unknowns, that passed muster. That was very likely written by the person whose name it bore. And that document, it turns out, was one of the more innocuous ones. It talks about, hey, I wonder, if we're dealing here with something that's not from our world or something like that, or it would refer to administrative processes and levels. Make sure that so and so hears about this crash or something like that. There was nothing spectacular in it, as far as like an extraterrestrial body or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the one that passed, wasn't really that big of a deal. I included in this two that I knew were fakes because of forensic work. I wanted to see if her methods would catch them, and they did. So that was good for me. I didn't tell her that until after the fact. Naturally, she was glad to hear it too. All of this is described in a report people can get on my website. The paper I wrote about this is free. So all of the Majestic documents, the ones that I could get a comparative group in terms of a name and then documents that were definitely written by that person, all of them failed. But the most interesting thing is that there were several authorship groups, speculated author groups, that were very close in alignment to each other. And again, I have a visual way of showing people this in the document they can get on my website. But Carol told me that when she saw that, she said, and she was very careful about her wording, and she wanted me to put it just a very specific way. She said, it doesn't prove that those documents were written by the same hand, but it really suggests that the same hand was involved.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for her part, her test just threw the whole thing out. The whole Majestic mystique just disappeared. Now, in fairness, I will try to be fair. These tests didn't include other documents that had no authorship. And some of those, like there's something called the Extraterrestrial Manual, Operations Manual. It has no authorship attribution, so it couldn't be tested according to this method.
Mm-hmm.
So there are still documents within the Majestic document, pile that have not been tested for by any sort of linguistic method as to their verification. So there are still some that are what we would classify, if we're going to be fair, as unknown.
But what it does show is that, except in one case, the documents that are attributed to people that you could test are more likely than not to not have actually been written by those people, and many of them that say they're written by different people were actually probably written by the same person.
Yeah, they're again, you have this overlap with 3 or 4 of the author groups, so that is a definite possibility that you could have the same hand. You have to ask yourself, well, how would they do this? Well, if I were the person on the inside that wanted to create these things, once I got the proper materials, I would want there to be thematic similarity. My own style, if I had to add text rather than just copying a paragraph here and moving a paragraph from this other thing over here, if I actually had to write text to make it coherent, make coherent sentences and paragraphs,
mm-hmm.
the pattern of my own mind, working through my hand and writing, is going to show up, and so that would account for the similarities. I have my signature, as it were, my mental signature, my cognitive linguistic signature would be all over that stuff. And so it would be very easy to copy, paste, type out longhand once you knew what you wanted to say to create these things. But if you did that, and if you had to add your own text, you're going to get results like we saw. So they're pretty suspicious. I think that's the most generous thing I could say, that they're really suspicious as far as the authorship attribution, and I consider them bogus. on the basis of this, not to mention their own checkered history. But again, it's only part of the collection, that are known as the majestic documents.
Thanks to Michael Heiser, and this has been, as I said, the first part of a two-part interview. Join us next time for the second part, where we will follow up and go into the details of some of the evidence or the claimed evidence for Zecharia Sitchin's various Anunnaki, ancient alien type ideas.